All right, everybody, we've got Philosophy Friday. Welcome, everybody. So, I think today we have the setup for a truly controversial topic, or perhaps we do. I know we've wanted a little bit more controversy in the past, Brett, but at least on this topic, on the one side, we've got you, who basically believes in remote work very strongly. And on the other side, you have myself, and not that I don't believe in remote work, but for something that I'm calling like complex products within a 0 to 1 sort of product situation. For me, I believe that in-person work is just more efficient and effective for me because I don't know how to do it in a remote work environment as efficiently or effectively. So anyway, just so everybody knows, the topic for today is going to be the future of work and really comparing kind of remote work versus in-person work. And hopefully we can dive into a bit of detail on this and talk about some of the nuance behind the situation that we're in. But maybe what we could do, Brett, is kind of like start from the high level and work our way down. And so in terms of the high level trend, obviously everyone's aware we had COVID, which kind of put everybody into this suddenly being in a remote work situation, and people have had to adjust. And I think what's happened is that a number of folks have said, oh, actually, a lot of the fears or misconceptions or perceptions about remote work kind of went away. And there are a number of folks who now think that remote work is the best way to go. And then there's other people who still do prefer office work and believe that that approach is more efficient and effective. And Brett, I know one of the great things about having you speak on this topic is that you were an early adopter of remote work even before COVID. So I was hoping we could start there in terms of like the higher level trend, what your thoughts were in terms of remote work even before COVID, and what do you believe, given the current situation that we are in, have been the biggest impacts, or what do you think the biggest impacts to an organization are from going from a in-person to a remote work type of situation?
Well, that's a lot to kick things off, JK, but I already forgot what the first one was. But I'll just, the first thing is that I think obviously everyone's been thrown into remote work that wasn't already doing remote work. And I think in some ways that's great. I think for the employees, for a lot of employees that's great because they start to realize how valuable it can be to work remotely. They can get tax benefits by moving. They can see their kids a lot more. They don't need to commute. They can work a lot of different times. There's just a lot of benefits from it as an employee. So that's one. The other is the misconception that getting thrown into remote work is what remote work is, right? And when I was thinking about what to answer this, it would be the equivalent of if tomorrow something hit a new virus, God forbid, that forced us to be in the office. Okay, my company would be
Yeah.
totally screwed, right?
Yeah.
We've got people in 17 different states, so to have us just start working in an office tomorrow would not work. It would take a very long time for us to transition, and I just want people to be careful about defining remote work as what they may have experienced over the last 2 years, because it really does create a system. It really is neat. You need a system, you need to prep, you need to build out the culture and the support necessary to make remote work. And when that happens, it's great. So I think that's probably two of the biggest things, and I just that have gone on in like sort of the last 2 years with COVID. Um, if you want me to talk a little bit, I'll stop there. But you did ask about why I went remote first, but
Yeah.
we can get into that later.
Okay. Okay. So maybe I could just kind of, from my perspective, like in just thinking more on a macro level, some of the things that I have observed and just by kind of speaking to other folks, talking to them anecdotally about what the impact has been for them in terms of shifting from in-person to uh, remote work. Some of the things that I believe have happened is one of the biggest impact, in my opinion, is this ability or inability to track hours, right? And so one of the things that happens when you're in office is everybody's in the office, and especially in like open office environments, there's this level of observability, right? And so it's not like, and especially in an open office, you're not going to be like playing your music, watching a movie, have your Facebook and all that stuff open all the time. Or maybe you are if if your screen is turned away, but there's, so one, I think that from a manager's perspective, there is kind of the shift from managing against hours to managing against outcomes, right? And so I believe a general shift in that direction, which then implies that if you're a bad manager, meaning you kind of depended on just seeing, oh, okay, these guys are in the office. I think they're we've got an open office environment. They're probably doing their work. Like that's not management anymore from a remote work situation because you don't know. And so I think what that has done is that has either exposed bad managers or has exploited bad managers. Meaning if you're working for someone who doesn't know what you're doing, like clearly you could be doing whatever. And I think the other thing that has kind of become apparent with remote work is that when you're in an office, you have essentially a controlled environment. Everyone has a uniform, consistent working environment. But when you shift to work from home or remote work, you've got all sorts of different situations, right? So you've got, I've got my own home office. I can kind of work, close the door, but not everybody has that kind of situation. And so when I'm on calls with various people, I can see like people in the background, sometimes people in their underwear in the background, or like a dog or a cat, or, and like some people are in the kitchen, some people in the bedroom. And so you've got a lot of heterogeneous working environments rather than like the in-office, very controlled environment, right? And so then you have to be able to accommodate those different environments that you have. And I would say like the final thing is that the office imposes a level of structure and discipline, right? So you have to be sitting at your desk at least for the hours there. If you're in an open office environment, there's this level of observability, as I mentioned, so that there's this level of discipline imposed upon employees. Whereas if you're home and nobody's watching you, now we're relying on individual employees having self-discipline. And if they don't have that self-discipline, it's like, oh, I've got all this freedom. Nobody's watching me. I can do whatever I want. Then I do think that, and it all depends on the people, but you can't count on the environment to impose the structure and self-discipline. You're now counting on the individual employees to have their own self-discipline and structure for their work. I don't know. Brett, would you agree with that?
I mean, I'm just going to throw this out there and kick it off this way.
Yeah.
I should have done it earlier, but remote work for me is like one of those technologies that you see some people adopting that you're so confident the rest of the world will eventually adopt, or eventually like just everyone. To me, remote work is so obviously going to be the future. And I kind of feel like I'm a little bit of the crazy man outside, like screaming that something's going to change. But it's so obvious to me a benefit of companies.
Yeah.
Once companies adjust to it. Like, I understand why companies today don't do it because they aren't structurally set up to do it, nor are managers, and nor are the people that work there, right? Like you mentioned all these things that pose issues to current companies that aren't set up for it. Mm-hmm. But once you build the systems for it, it becomes so obvious that remote work is the best option for businesses that I'm saying it right now. It will be the future of work, and companies that do not adopt it will perish. Boom. Just saying that. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen overnight. But I would say in the next 5 to 7 years that remote work will become the majority of work we're just talking about tech companies, right? We're not talking
Okay.
about hospitals and
Right.
people
Right.
who have to actually
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But even hospital, even a lot of the hospital stuff will get reduced dramatically.
Right.
But I would guess like in the next 5 to 7 years, it will just become the majority of work will be remote, will be done remote.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
would.
all the problems that you listed, we could just go through and I can tell you how they can be solved,
Okay.
pretty easily.
Yeah. Let's dive into that then. And as far as like the first impact that I mentioned, in terms of shifting from hours to outcomes, would you agree with that? And then in terms of the systems that you're describing, what do you specifically do to kind of track or to kind of manage that?
Okay, well, I mean, the first thing is probably the hours and the output.
Hmm.
I mean, probably the biggest thing is we just hire people who are getting work done, right?
Okay.
And it's like, well, that's easy for you to say, but we basically spend the first probably 4 to 6 months. I mean, you probably heard of our onboarding. We hire people who are going to start doing work immediately. They don't have a lot of other things they're doing, so we see their work immediately. And once we see that they're not very proficient at getting work done on their own, tracking their time, and basically producing a lot in the first 4 to 6 months, we get rid of them, right?
Okay.
And so what you're going to have happen, and it's easy for us to say that because our talent pool is 14 million contractors in the United States and beyond, right? We're now hiring in 4 different countries. So my pool of people is 14 to let's say 20 million people. Your talent pool is the people that are willing to drive to your office, right?
Hmm.
So for you to go, well, we're going to get rid of this person because they're not competent is an unwise decision because it's very hard for you to find a replacement. It's extremely easy for me to find a replacement because the talent pool is so much bigger. And so that unlocks this ability to basically let go of people who aren't disciplined.
Okay.
It is what you're saying is they're not disciplined people. They do not want to work unless they're being babysat. And for me, we just don't have a tolerance for it because we can't afford to. Now, specifically speaking in terms of time and output, we do track all of our time in Google spreadsheets. And I actually really love that because I think time in tech work is like wasted inventory in a factory. It's work in progress that's just laying around that no one really tracks. And by putting in a spreadsheet, you actually can see as a manager, okay, we invested $10,000 in that $30,000 project, or we're spending 20 hours because you can associate hours with costs very easily as a manager. And so you get a very clear idea of your costs, right? Like you could go look into and say, wow, geez, we're spending 20% of our cost on spec designs or 30% of our cost on art. And so it gives you more details into your cost structure, which is great. And then in terms of output, we really solve that with that first 4 to 6 weeks. And once you hit that 6 week period, we just generally have a level of trust that you're producing. And if we do start seeing hiccups, we can go look into our technology to see how is your output, right? Like how is it stacking up to other people? And in general, people can kind of like, people know, they can feel it because there's not a lot of like BS. There's not a lot of water cooler, all hands, all this other stuff. You can really sense it very easily if someone's a producer or not a producer. And
Right.
that's
So
also part
if
of it.
I'm understanding you correctly, it sounds like what you're saying is that you do observe, at least initially, what the output of new employees are. You probably give them specific targets in terms of deliverables, do X, Y, Z, and then you kind of watch their work, see how many hours they're, I guess they're self-reporting hours. And so they might say, I spent 12 hours to create X, 20 hours to create Y, 30 hours to create Z, for example. And then you, because you know the work, you have a sense of whether that was a reasonable amount of time and what the level of performance was for those tasks. And then as they kind of prove themselves, you can then like ease up on the kind of observability aspect of it. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much. And we rarely check the timetables or anything like that unless you sort of start sensing as a manager or as a boss that there's something wrong. And then I think you have a great diagram later about this. Then you have the tools necessary to go look and see. And I
Right.
think those tools are going to get more sophisticated. For example, we use Upwork, and Upwork has a lot of tools like they do screenshots and things like that, where you can see what people are working at their computer. I
Okay.
don't think that's necessary in higher level tech companies, but if that's a big concern of yours, those tools are there, and there'll be more and more of them as remote work becomes a bigger component of the workforce. Like these tech tools will start arising, like
Yeah.
Upwork does, where you can just like see their screenshots. Like, okay, you work these exact hours, and here's the screenshot, and here's what they produce, and it'll become much easier for a manager to kind of dig into that. But I
Yeah.
think in the beginning, you can kind of build that trust in the first 4 to 6 months, and just kind of establish this person as a producer. Because I think one big difference between our company and I think maybe some other companies is we believe that humans do want to work, and they want to work in great environments where they're challenged and they're valued and they're pushed to a certain extent. That's my theory, and so we're trying to create that environment. I think other companies, maybe not think that way. I think in tech we're just fortunate to have like sort of good work to do, but we try to create that environment, and then we kind of believe like humans will work because they want to work in a way.
Right. So I actually don't disagree to. I mean, I think we're actually agreed to a large extent in terms of that aspect. Like, so for me, I also believe that in a remote work environment, that you like one of the points I was making is that it does shift from hours to outcomes, in that I do think that if you're going to be a manager in a remote work environment, that actually has a few different impacts. The first is that I think managers are going to have to get better at setting what those targets are. What should the expectation for employee output look like? And then two, those managers would need to, in order to really observe and see if employees are doing are being productive and to evaluate the performance, they're going to have a better understanding of work deliverables in terms of the inputs and outputs of those deliverables, which I don't think at a lot of large companies, if I'm being honest. There's a lot of managers who have never done the work of their direct reports. They don't understand what it takes. They don't really know. But again, that kind of is mitigated in an office environment when they're like, okay, Bill and Sally have been at their desks for a long time, they're working hard. So something like
Yeah.
that. And I think,
What
oh, go ahead.
But that can be replaced. I mean, you just hire someone remotely and then, see how much they're getting done.
Yeah, well,
And I
right.
bet you they're getting done. I mean, the other thing is I don't necessarily think you need to know. I think there's a difference between good managers and bad managers, and good managers should know to a certain extent what their direct reports are doing. I mean, they may not have to write the code or do it, but I mean, they should be knowledgeable about some of the things that their reports are doing. And in that sense, I don't necessarily think you need to know exactly how long it is. I think you can. Well, no, I do. You don't have to tell them, but you need to have a sense of it, right? And so
Okay.
you yourself should have a sense of, man, this generally is going to take 10 to 20 hours, because if I did it, it would take 10, right? And when it takes 50, that's when, as a manager, you go in and you start asking questions like, hey, why did this take 50 hours?
Right.
And you can open up the spreadsheet and then you ask them, like, there's nothing else to do here except when you can go see. I mean, the thing that's beautiful about this too is when you are at an office, there's so many other things that someone could do in 50 hours. When they're remote, if they're working 50 hours, like you should be able to really stack up. Like, in the 50 hours I was working on this project, and it's like, okay, well, why did it take 50 hours? Well, I struggle with this. Is, why didn't you ask a question? Well, da, da, da. And if those things are piling up, then that person's not really a good fit. Or there could be something that you need to course correct, or it could be an honest problem. Like, I really couldn't figure out this one thing, and da 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 da. And I think you can also outline those ahead of time, right? Like, hey, I expect this to take 10 to 20 hours. Once you hit 20 hours, like, ping me,
Right.
which is a nice way to also control costs as a manager as well.
Right. Yeah. But it also sounds like we both agree in terms of the importance or criticality of observation. And in my belief, very similar to physics, I believe in something that's called the observer effect. Because, in physics, it's believed that an observer actually affects the outcome. And I believe that with employees as well. And kind of like the physics example, I don't know if you're familiar with the Schrodinger's cat experiment, but Schrodinger, like according to this physics concept, believe that if you put a cat in a box with a radioactive material, and then that cat has a 50-50% chance of survival, that observation actually impacts whether that cat lives or dies. And like when you
This is a
observe,
really interesting metaphor for work.
and so like the cat actually exists according to quantum physics. The cat exists in a state of being both dead or alive until the observation happens, and then it goes into a specific state. So, I mean, the high level thing for me is that, like physics, and according to the observer effect in physics, it's believed that the observer impacts the outcome, right? And so I believe also for employees that there has to be some kind of observation system of some kind. Now, it doesn't have to be a complex system, but like there has to be some level of observation in order for the outcome to be higher, right? And I think even for myself, like if nobody was watching me, if nobody, I think the fact that I know that I'm being observed, and I force myself to be observed in terms of the transparency that I provide employees at my company, I think it forces me to be more disciplined, and it provides that structure that I wouldn't have, let's say, if I were in an office environment, for example.
Yeah, I completely agree, but I don't think you need an office environment to do it. And I think actually
Yeah.
an office
So,
environment is costly and provides proxy variables. So what you're trying to observe is the value created by the employee and the cost of that employee, right?
yeah,
At the end of the day, that's what you're trying to observe, right? The ROI of that employee and as it pertains to the greater like company. The ROI, the value is the work product. So I don't care if you're in a simple or complex system, there should be some work product that they're creating. It could be code, it could be art, it could be a spec, it could be a math analysis, it could be strategy, it could be a report. It doesn't like it. And we're talking about tech. Okay, so it can be, that's the value that they created. Now that you have track time, you can see the specific cost that it took to create that thing. Okay, so now as a manager, you can judge that person on the most important thing, which is they created this thing, and it cost us 10 hours of time times the hourly rate of this person. Boom, right? You have it. And what is so bad about the office in-person office proxy variables is, oh, I'm staring at someone, so therefore they're working. One, a manager walking around the office staring at people and calling meetings is really fucking expensive, right? So you're stripping that out. You're getting rid of that expensive manager that I know you can't stand, and I can't stand either. That just like schedules meetings. Hey, JK, how are things going? What have you been working on this week? Like, fuck off, dude. I'm working. Like, I would like be working right now, right? And two, it doesn't base the value created by looking at someone staring at a screen, because someone staring at a screen, I can tell you, is spending a lot of time on Facebook or wherever else they're spending it on, like something, probably not Facebook anymore. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
But something else, that's not valuable. They're just sitting there, right? And when you take out you actually make it harder for the employee too, because when you take out the fact that they can just come to the office and put their face behind the screen and everyone thinks that they're working, they actually have to produce too. So it's actually a win-win.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that for me the benefit of the office isn't because I think people should manage by hours instead of outcomes. I do think that, just generally speaking, no office managers should be managing via outcomes. I'm just saying that remote work kind of shifts them towards outcomes rather than hours. But maybe one of the things we could talk.
It's all easily solved soon. That's what I'm saying. Is like the problems you're listing to me. It's like I get why companies don't do it today because they don't have it, but it's.
So maybe we could get to the part where I think that we probably disagree the most, which is, because you believe that all work eventually, well, not all work, but generally speaking, all work besides, the type of work that you have to physically be there should be remote. And the distinction I would make would be.
Will be.
Sorry?
Will be.
Okay, will be.
Will be.
So the distinction I would make is that for a type of work that I'm just calling like complex work, meaning where you've got, long time duration projects, plus you've got work outputs, which may be more variable in nature, or actually not variable, nonlinear in nature, and in which there are a lot of interactions required by a lot of people. I think those are the situations in which, again, I'm not saying it can't be done remote. I'm just saying I don't know how to do it remote. And as an example, when I was at FunPlus working on King of Avalon, we initially started with a work situation where we had 4 different offices. Two main ones and 2 small ones. And eventually, there was just so much friction and miscommunication that I eventually brought everything into Beijing. And then we became so much more productive, efficient, effective. And just because, for me, the type of product in which you've got a lot of different disciplines and it's not relatively straightforward, and there's a lot of changes and iteration happening, that, again, for me, I haven't been able to figure out how to do that in a remote work way in which there wouldn't be a big gap in terms of output, productivity, speed, unless we were in person. But I don't know what you think about
I
that,
think
Brett.
that when you're creating something, as you say, 0 to 1, right? I think that that's probably the best case for being together in a working environment. That said, if you're planning on just creating a company and ditching it, then I think that's totally fine. I think if you want to create a company that is going to survive just creating that 0 to 1 product and continue to go on after that, which a lot of startups don't. A lot of startups are just trying to go for the 5-year plan, which is fine. Then it's not necessary to really build a super proficient system, because the value you're going to create with that product is going to outweigh the crappy operation system that you built, which we see over and over again, right? I mean, how many startups do we see blow it out of the gate in the first 5 years and then peter off pretty quickly in the next 2 to 5 years after they get sold, right?
So
I think that's the best. I think this is the best argument for being all together, because you don't really care about the longevity of the company.
Right. Well, I guess
Beyond that,
yeah, I guess what I would say is, like, if we were to shift to, like, let's say we achieve product market fit, product scale, figured out that part of it, then if you were to ask me in live ops, do we need to be all in person? I'd probably say maybe not. So I thought
Yeah.
we were going to disagree more on this, but maybe
I'm
we
just
don't.
saying that's the strongest case. I still wouldn't do it.
Okay.
And that's because you're trying to create the greatest product in the world, right? Like, you're trying to create the greatest shooter game in the world, right? I mean, is that what you're trying to do?
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
very difficult.
do you think that
product,
what do
yeah.
you think is better? Okay, being able to hire anybody in the world, any single person, or being in an office together?
Being in an office together.
Okay. Okay. I mean, why? I mean, what would be so great about being in office? What is
because it's not an individual sport. It's not like the quarterback can win. We need the whole team, and we need a lot of different disciplines as part of that.
You still
team.
have this whole team. What is it that you'll still have all the disciplines? What is it that being right next to somebody adds that much value?
Well, because
sitting right next to each other, sitting right next to somebody.
Yeah, because
right?
the interactions are so fast, and because there are a lot of different disciplines that may all need to dynamically interact very quickly, and that maybe there's a world in the future in the metaverse of some kind where art and engineering and a producer can dynamically just kind of meet instantaneously and kind of like
on
work
video?
almost in a real-time environment, in which case sure, we don't need everyone in the same office in that case. But I would say for me personally, the kinds of communication required and the amount of stuff where it's helpful not just to like talk, but have like a Blackboard and be able to write stuff in, right there in person very quickly. Like there are so many of those types of meetings and conversations and interactions that, again, I'm not saying it can't be done, but I've never seen a team do it in terms of the 0 to 1 new game development context. Maybe they're out there, but I haven't seen it, and I haven't been able to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, well, I think I don't think that what you're talking about is that valuable. I actually think it's detrimental to creating a 0 to 1 product. Because I think in general those interruptions are extremely costly to creating really great work, and I also think that what you're talking about is something that may create value in, I assume, like, if you're in person, you probably have better interactions if you're going to try to brainstorm or something. But those brainstorming sessions, like, I don't know if I personally find them to be better remote. Like, not personally, I mean, I've done both. And I think in-person meetings are actually one of the most biased areas of work beyond interviewing. I'd actually say the second most biased place. And so you get these meetings where you have people screaming or aggressive or good at verbal negotiation or taller or bigger or whatever. And those people win out in person. Whereas if you go remote and you sort of separate that, and I mean, we don't have meetings as well, so we can go. I mean, obviously we don't want to talk about that, but you remove a lot of those bias, and then you actually come to better decisions because you're allowing that person who's super quiet or super thoughtful or takes 2 days to come up with a decision to actually think about what they're talking about, and those conversations are actually better. Because when I'm commenting on something, I actually think for 5, 10, 20 minutes to think about how I'm gonna respond. It's similar to a podcast, right? Like, we don't just jump in a room and do a podcast. Our podcasts are better if I think about what I'm gonna say, I comment on it. You think about how you're gonna respond to that. You comment on that. So the quality of the conversation, the quality of the brainstorm or whatever, is much better than if I just spew out my thoughts like that. And you spew out your thoughts. It's just 1 second of prep for those thoughts, and then what's generally guiding the decisions is kind of like these, like I said, these bias. So
Yeah, I think for me, it really does come down, like the way that I think about, especially creating new game product, is that I view it as a series of pretty major challenges in the speed at which we can execute against those problems and finding solutions. Again, for me and my experience and the teams I've worked with, it's just been better in person. And maybe the one thing I will say is that I do think if I had to
and the
stack
one
rank
experience
order,
you've had, the one remote experience you've had is what? This 4 different offices?
well, I'll put it to you this way: like if I had to stack rank what my personal experience is, it would be, I would probably stack rank it as in person first, fully remote, and then at the very bottom would be like a 2 office situation, which is kind of what we had at.
And have you ever done fully remote?
Well, we're doing it now.
You're fully remote now.
Yeah, I mean we can't. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it's like getting thrown into fully remote without really prepping for it. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there are benefits to being in an office, right? I think that you do get that sort of emotional connection. You get some of that chemistry. But when I look at all of the positives to having remote work versus all of the negatives to having someone come in the office, it's very clear, at least to me, that remote work is better. And a large extent of that is the cost savings, which as a startup, you're not that cost conscious because you've raised money and you're kind of just trying to get this product market fit. Although I could be wrong about that, but it generally doesn't seem that way for startups. And so, I guess I do kind of agree with you that I'm going to say again, I think that the case where I think it makes the most sense is when you're like going from 0 to 1 and you've raised $4 million. You don't really care about cost again, and you're just trying to, you've got the 5-year plan, right? Which you just don't put a lot of value on having a great operational system because you're not that concerned with cost, and you're willing to spend to get people. You're willing to be kind of frivolous with spend, right? Like you don't really care. Well, I mean, there's plenty of stories of startups getting all the stupid office, like the crazy stuff in the office, and that does work for a little while. So yeah, I agree. But I mean, beyond that,
Well, I will say it sounds like this.
I still wouldn't do it. I
Yeah.
wouldn't do that because you would have less burn rate. You'd have less reliance on your investors. You would be able to retain more value from your company, and you would be able to hire anybody in the world to do this stuff. And I generally put value on deep thought work over like
Right.
the chemistry that you create.
Yeah.
And I personally don't think that interrupting your devs to go, yo, dude, I have this really great idea for the shooter. What do you think? And they're just like coding the idea you told them a day ago, and they're like looking at you like,
Right.
fuck you.
But I think this is the
on
topic
this
we probably disagree the most on, right? This and maybe Elon Musk or something. So,
No,
so it's
I
good.
don't
It's
know
good
much
we
about
have
Elon
differing
Musk.
opinions on this.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
It's just like it's so bizarre. I mean, I shouldn't probably, but it's like it's so almost obvious to me that remote work is the future for any company beyond what you're talking about, and even your company. I would.
Yeah.
I mean, because, dude, what if COVID never ends? Okay, so you're telling me, like, do you really want to not be prepared for the next COVID?
Yeah, if COVID never ends, I mean, I didn't say that we can't do remote work because that's what we're doing now. We're making progress now. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that if I'm thinking about how to be as effective, as efficient, as productive as possible for me and how I know how to do things, then I need everyone to be in the office together, or the majority of the people to be in the office together. And one thing we did also do at Fun Plus is we did have, for certain roles, we did hire people that weren't fully in office, but they would live somewhere else and come in for like 2 weeks every couple months.
Yeah.
And so
Hub and spoke model.
yes, something like that, which I think is fine. So we have a plan for that, which we're calling the superstar model, where for certain specific key roles, not for every role, but for two specific people, we would try and hire anyone in the world, but we would ask them to come in for a couple of weeks every couple months.
I would almost do it the opposite. I mean, if I were to do it, if I was going to go hub and spoke, I would go the opposite. I would actually outsource a lot of the sort of remedial tasks. Like I would have my core be in an office, and then I would have like, hey, I want this background built, or I want this character built, and I would have all that outsourced remotely because you can get so much benefit from that, and it's very task oriented, and that's much easier to outsource. So I would probably flip that on its head. I mean, of course, I would let some, I would let some talent in as well, because then you get the benefit of being able to hire anyone in the world. But I would err on the side of having those people in, because theoretically they're the ones who have like the creativity, and creativity is very valuable, and it is sort of the secret sauce to going 0 to 1 in some ways, the execution being the other part, which I think you're compromising on by not having a more efficient or more streamlined system. But
I want to hear from the audience. So for anyone watching right now, 0 to 1 new game development in office or remote. So make sure you comment or send us a note on that.
It's like getting to the point where I just want to start a company to just like prove
You should.
a gaming company, a gaming, like I just want to like create, like I don't
Do it.
I don't think games is a great business for me, but it's like I just want to do it to just be like, listen, you can do this. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done both. I've made games
Yeah,
in office,
I think you
and
should.
my, and then
Okay, go ahead.
no. I mean, no, we were going to talk about linear and nonlinear, and I do think that. Do you want to talk about that at
Oh,
all?
we could, yeah. So, I mean, one of the ways in which I define complex work is essentially like for certain kinds of work, I think the difficulty lies in, okay, so let's say we're moving bricks, right? So we've got workers
Yeah,
who are
I
moving
understand
50
linear.
bricks from point
I
A to point B.
understand linear and
No,
complex.
no,
Yeah.
for our audience, but I know you do. I'm explaining for our
I
audience.
think our audience does too.
Okay,
Is this
okay.
how you manage? Do you explain to your subordinates like how much time do you waste explaining like shit like linear versus complex to people at work?
Okay.
I just want to know because if I was at work and you're like, "Hey, I'm gonna give you this metaphor for what simple and complex means," and then spend 10 minutes telling me about bricklayers, I'd
Okay.
be
Well,
like,
okay. So what do you think?
I'd be applying to liquid and grit. That's what I would be doing. I would be like,
Okay. So what are your thoughts on simple versus complex work?
I think all these yeah. First of all, I don't think that anything we're doing is that complex, and second of all, I think everything that's complex can be broken down into simple linear things. It takes longer time period, but you can create a car through a factory on a linear path. Okay,
But that's
so
creating a car is simple work.
creating a car. I mean, it's a pretty complex thing to
So
create.
so you didn't understand what I meant by nonlinear
Well,
output.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's what a complex.
It's
What
like
is
let me
complex?
give you a better example.
What is
Design it,
complex?
compose a hit song.
Yeah,
Composing a
I
hit
mean,
song, you may have no output, and then you have output. When you're moving bricks from A to B, it's linear.
I mean,
Non-linear means
composing a
you could have
song is still
progress, no
linear too.
progress, loss of progress, and then you have full progress. That's what
No,
I mean.
I understand what you mean, but if you
Okay.
can still break down composing a song into components, right? I mean, Postal Service was an amazing album created
Yeah, but there are
over
going to
the
be
Postal Service.
components of that which are unpredictable in terms of the output.
Well, I mean, that doesn't make them complex just because they output
Well,
like
that's what I'm
something.
saying. That's how I define complex.
But that's not complex. I mean, that's I guess like complex is that it has like a lot of different variables.
That's why I
You're
was
saying that
explaining my definition of complex.
it's a wrong definition of something. You're saying that you have variable output.
No, it's non-linear output where you might have very little progress, then sudden progress, or you might have progress, you might have even a reduction in progress in some cases, and then suddenly you've got the progress, right? And so that would be something like, let's say you're trying to design a new control scheme or a new like gameplay mechanic, and some of them might work, or sometimes they spend a lot of time and suddenly they actually achieve that result or not.
So they're sent back to earlier steps in the process.
You
That
usually not,
sounds
but sometimes yes.
like
Like
I mean
if you couldn't make a control scheme work, then yeah, then you're back to square
I
one.
mean tell me a specific example. Like you're making a game right now. Is a game a complex thing?
In certain cases, yes. So for example, like the design of a system in the game, or let's say we actually do have a specific gameplay mechanic that we're unsure of, so we're going to need to prototype. And as we prototype this specific gameplay mechanic, like, we're not sure. Is it going to work? I don't know. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. How much time? Like, I can't say, okay, guys, it will take you 8 days to design a hit gameplay mechanic in our game. I mean, who knows? And they might make like very little progress and then some progress, or they might make a ton of progress, but that last 20% takes them a really long time. That's how I was defining that.
Right. Well, let's
Because
break
that
it
kind of
down
work is
though.
very difficult.
Okay, let's break it down. I mean, one you're saying is that you're producing things that may have defects or may not, so it may be
That
sent
has
back
risk.
to earlier
I
stages.
wouldn't say,
Yeah.
I wouldn't characterize as defects, but risk.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just translating into sort of operational
Okay.
terminology, but it gets sent back to an earlier stage. Okay. So if you're designing something and then you create it and then you test it and it's not working and you need to rebuild it, you just go back to step 2 in the very linear path. Right. So you're saying your system has it has a high defect percentage, right? But it's still going to follow a linear path. And then you're
No,
saying that,
because
well, it
here's the
is
thing. Like,
because it's going to go on a linear path. It's going to go step 1, step 2, step 3, back to step 2 to 3 to 4, back to step 2 to 3 to 4, 5.
right. So Brett, like you're thinking of this in a very reductionist way.
Dude, stop. I mean, stop with the frameworks. Just tell me a scenario that we can break
Well,
down.
okay. So
That's complex. Like
okay. Let me
0 to
explain it to you.
1, 1, like everything is like, it's not.
So the thing that you're missing about this, Brett, is that
Tell me
when you think
exactly
about
what
it,
you're talking about.
I'm
I've
trying
made
to.
a game, so
I'm
I'm
trying
trying to
to.
understand
I'm
how
trying.
you're making a game
Give
differently.
me a second. Give me a second. When you're trying to create a hit game,
Okay.
you have to also take a holistic approach because you can't engineer
Right.
a hit game from step A to Z. So let's say this game mechanic works, then you might have enough to make a hit game. If it doesn't, you might have to put your effort into something else, into a system, into a different compulsion loop, into like that's why it's complex because it's not only this part, there are interdependencies and there are nonlinear the output in terms of some of the components that you're trying to design will have nonlinear inputs as well as outputs, right? Or linear input, nonlinear outputs.
I mean, okay, you have a game, you have an idea for a game, but beyond once you establish the idea of the game, you have to break the game into pieces that you have to build, right? Like you would have to build the engine, the characters, all these different things, right? Once after you
Yeah,
design the
if
concept
all
of
I
it,
wanted to do is build and launch a game, of course I could do that linearly. Absolutely could do it linearly. Now, the moment that we're talking about building a very successful top grossing game where you've got competition, you've got to understand whether like this is the art part. The art part is understanding, do we have enough and do we have something that's compelling to users so that they would actually want to spend money and it could be successful. That's the
right?
part
But
that you
even
can't
that,
just say, let's break this down
yeah.
into steps 1 through 10, and then we're just going to do all the steps and we're going to have a hit game. If it were that easy, everyone would have a hit game, and they don't.
Well, breaking things down into steps is extremely difficult. That's why people don't do it. It's actually super hard. Um, so I understand why people don't do it, and people hate doing it, and that's why people just go around being managers in offices because actually breaking down steps into really small components is actually extremely difficult, and that's kind of why I generally feel like people don't do it. I mean, it's humans just generally want to get going. They just want to do it. They just want to like start acting on it, and all the things that we do to break things down is extremely difficult. It takes months for us to break every single step down into components so that we understand how things are built and how it's linear.
Yeah, and so I guess
And the more
that's
complex the system that it gets, the harder it is to do it. But
yes.
there are parts of the process that are non-linear. I understand what you're saying. It's like if I thought about the process, and I'm thinking about the process now, there are components of it that leverage human creativity and human emotions and that second side of the brain that we've talked about. Those will be built into the system. It's not like you can just say, but they're not, even great writers or great artists, they work every single day. And yeah, it might take a while for them to create something, but it still sort of follows a similar process, which is like you get in a music studio and you start making music, right? Like you don't. So there would be parts of the process that would probably be like this bubble where it would say like this is the non-linear sort of creative part of it, but then once that creative part was done, it would go right back into a linear process, which would be write the spec, like tell the art team. So uh, I guess I would have I understand somewhat what you're saying, but those could be like those could just be parts of the process.
Yeah. So and by the way, I guess like where we would probably differ is that, and we do believe in reductionism. We do believe in breaking down higher complexity into component parts. But we also believe in holism, meaning like we have to also look at the entire system as a whole and try to understand whether, like, let's say if we didn't work out the gameplay mechanic, whether there's something else we can add or other things we can do from a holistic perspective to make this thing a hit game or not. And and because we have a lot of those types of conversations and things like that, and because it is that complex, that's one of the reasons why, we like to have people in the same office. That's, and again, I'm not claiming that it has to be done in the office, and we're not doing it in the office right now, but I also just think we're not as effective as we could be if everyone was together.
Is everyone involved in that holistic process? Or is it mostly Paul and maybe one or two other people?
We try and get people as involved as possible, but nobody owns the holistic vision right now is owned by Paul. And yeah.
So why does Paul need to be in the same office as other people if it's kind of just owned by him?
Well,
I mean, that's where it's like,
yeah, that it's not so.
To me,
a lot
art art to me is really this holistic process that you're talking about. To me, is more so done on an individual level. If I think about a great artwork or an artist or a musician or whatever, they're going to create that pretty much on their own, like with maybe a few people, similar to like music, right? Like they're going to have two or three people around them, but it's going to be like this small group of people in the studio. And in general, they're going to go off and write their lyrics or think of their ideas and things like that.
Yeah, maybe
But
I shouldn't so much conflate the notion of working in the office with the concept of product complexity, or my definition of product complexity. But
I mean, I think the music one is actually a good metaphor for it. I mean, to create a great CD, create a great song or album, right? It's like there's going to be four people in the studio creating this thing, and then it's going to get chopped up by the editor. It's going to get like the producer is going to look at it, then the person who's going to create the album is going to look at it. Like there's all these components that go beyond that, but the core album is created by this small group of people that are going to create this holistic view of it, or this artistic creation process. And then maybe even there's one person who sort of does all that. But beyond that, then the whole process follows a pretty linear path, right? And that's how I think about the creation process. Is yes, maybe there is. I generally feel like it's more of an individualistic thing where someone's going to be the writer or the creator of it, and maybe they have some type of coach. So it's like Rick Rubin, which I love that video you sent, and Mac Miller, right? And there's two people working on it, or it's whoever it is. It's a team. It's Run DMC and Rick Rubin, but then they're going to create this album, and then after they've created this vision of the album, it's going to follow this linear path. And yeah, what you're saying is maybe it gets through the linear path, and then some exec decides that they don't really like it, and it gets sent back to the studio, and then that 5-person group's got to do the non-linear path again. But really, that non-linear path component of it is just one little part of this more linear path. And I do agree.
right.
Like,
Well, but I'm also saying like even the outcome is nonlinear, right? Or in the sense that like it's not like we can say, okay, you three guys make a hit song, and then and out comes, a number 5 top song, right? It might be number 1, it might be number 10, it might be number 200. Like you can't predictably say, go make the top number 3 song. You know what I'm saying? So that outcome is going to be variable.
Well, of course. I mean, we can't control the
Yeah.
outcome, but we can better control the outcome if we have a good process, I think. And I think particularly if you're making multiple ones, right? And again, that goes back to whether or not you're actually planning on making more games. I mean, if you're planning on making more games, and I agree, like if I was in your shoes, how much would I invest in the process? I probably wouldn't invest a lot, nor did I invest a
We
lot in
actually
my
do invest a
process.
lot in our processes.
Okay. Well, well, I probably would invest less on making it um, reducing the cost of it, I guess, because you're only making one of these games probably every couple of years. But over time, I would probably try to operationalize it because that's, I mean, really the longevity. If you go out 100 years, right? Let's say you go out 100 years, and we're looking at your company on a 100-year time horizon. Let's say your investors are interested in getting their payout in 100 years from now, right? So that means you're going to have to create 20 of these games, okay? And what you're telling me is that the creation of these games is really dependent on these people like sitting in a room and like having this, this moment of genius, right? That, as much as you're the manager of this 100-year plan, you're going to want to figure out how you can really operationalize that. And that's why companies like Starbucks or McDonald's and Amazon and some of these others do so well, is because they can control the quality of the output because they've created a system that's repeatable. And so I think that's what is so important if you want to have a company that's going to last 100 years, is like you want to, as much as you can, be able to control the quality of it and reduce the cost of it, and creating a linear process as much as you can. Maybe it's only 70% or 80% or 20% or whatever, but the more you do, the more the company at a higher level has control over the cost and the control over the quality. And those two things are extremely valuable to creating a sustainable, long-term, high-value company.
Yeah, and maybe it's another topic, but I do think that that's another challenge, right? Maybe aside from Nintendo, I don't think there's any games company that has kind of stood the test of time and has created a organization that can reliably and predictably create hit products. Probably Nintendo, maybe like even Blizzard's starting to lose its way now, right? Where they've stopped cranking out hits, but maybe a topic for another
Well, I think
time.
that's really, no, I think that's super
Okay.
important to our listeners, because you're reliant on talent. And when you rely on talent,
Mhm.
talent kind of owns your company, right? Because once talent walks out the door, you don't have a company. Like you have the product that the talent created, and you can basically farm that as long as you can farm it, like you're talking about maybe potentially some companies have done. But if you are relying on talent to create the thing that's going to create you a lot of money, and you can't replace that talent, then you're screwed, right? And so that's what successful companies figure out, is how to reduce the reliance on talent. That's why Starbucks, when you go to Starbucks, you get the same exact coffee in a Starbucks here as you do down where you are, because they've eliminated the need for a talented barista to make you a perfect coffee. They've made a system so that the coffee is exactly the same here as it is down there. And that's allowed them to scale, create predictability, lower costs. And so that's why it's so important to be able to do this. And I think, yeah, I'm not going to name names because I know you're like, well, but there are some mobile gaming companies that have done a good job of creating, that have produced results after they've IPO'd or after they've gotten pretty big. And I
On the
would
live ops
guess
side,
that,
for sure. I 100% agree on the live ops side.
yeah, well, I mean, even, yeah, on the game side, yeah, it's hard to tell because the industry is kind of young. So it's hard to tell, but you're right. It's a very hard problem to solve, and it's extremely hard when you only produce like maybe two of them a year or one of them a year or whatever. And generally, when you get bigger, you try to rely on different skill sets. So you start relying on M&A, or you start relying on distribution or some other things, because you remove the need to use talent. The problem with that is it's hard to do. And that's why you see so many companies start out, blow up, and then the talent leaves, and then the company has to now become a big company that relies on a different strategic tactic to be successful, like M&A and distribution or whatever it is. And they struggle to do it because it's very hard to shift culture and shift sort of the tactical advantages that you have.
All right, Brett, maybe I could ask you about, so when I talk to a number of companies, there seem to be some recurring themes in terms of some of the big problems that they have come across when it comes to remote work. And maybe I could get your feedback in terms of what you think of these problems. And probably the ones that I could think of, there are three problems in particular. And so starting with the first one, and especially at larger companies, kind of problem one has been that a lot of the employees of these companies after remote work have complained that they are just deluged, and this is especially at larger companies, by Zoom calls from 9 to 5, just fully stacked up with Zoom calls because, I guess maybe they're used to talking to one another at the office or these checkpoints or whatever. And so it's just like stacked up with Zoom calls. I don't know if you've talked to other folks or companies that have seen a similar problem, but I feel like that's a pretty recurring theme that I've heard from especially folks at some of the larger companies, and including those that have recently changed their name. But what do you think, Brett?
I mean, the problem is meetings, not whether it's remote or in the office, right? I mean,
Right.
it's just
So you think that's more of that's a solvable
communication
problem and more of maybe like a process and kind of work philosophy problem.
it's more of a communication problem than it is
Okay.
whether you're at the office or not, right? Because when they go in the office, they're going to be meeting in person. It's probably less exhausting because they're not staring at a screen the whole time, and they get to talk about their cat or whatever in person and walk from room to room. But it's still a lot of meetings. I think probably to solve that is I think you probably remove some of the people. You probably have too much like layers and layers of people, so you're probably too much overlap. And then the other is just clear communication. It's like, hey, we need your team to do this. Have it written down so you can tackle it. And I these changes are extremely hard to do if you can't have it done from top down. And
Right.
I've sort of learned this the hard way because these changes are things that I guarantee listeners out there are going, would I like meetings, Brett? And I always equate it to donuts, right? I like eating donuts. If you don't tell me that donuts are bad for me, I'll eat donuts all day long. Meetings are kind of the
Yeah.
same thing. I mean, people are just going to do what's easiest and what they like unless they really understand what the cost is. And donuts is pretty clear. You're going to get fat and potentially die from a heart attack. With work, uh, low-level worker at a giant company is not going to understand the cost or the impact, the negative impact that an excess meeting is going to have on the whole entire company. And so you need somebody at the top who really understands the P&L and understands how that impacts the bottom line and how that impacts the stock price and all this other things to kind of come down and be like, we're cutting 80% of our meetings right now,
Right.
because that person, everyone's going to be like, you're an ass. But the reality is that person is actually saving the company and making everyone a lot of money if they do it right. And so they're in the end not going to be an ass, but for a little while everyone's going to think they're an ass. So you just kind of need somebody who's got the guts to do that.
Okay. Problem two. So some employees have completely slacked off in cases, or in certain situations, they have found that some of these employees have been working multiple jobs, like 2 jobs, or in one case, 3. What do you think about that?
I see no problem in the second. I'll just answer that. I mean, if they can get their work done, I don't care if they work 10 jobs. Why would it matter to me? I think that's a good example of companies caring about things that are not necessary. Why do you care? Why do you care where do they work? Why do you care what they look like? Why do you care what they wear? Why do you care? Why are you caring so much about these things? All you should be caring about, as we just talked about, is their cost and their output. If they work 10 jobs, it doesn't really matter to me.
My suspicion is that in these cases, their output probably wasn't being observed or wasn't being tracked. And then when
Which
they
is
found this
the more
out,
important problem.
I mean,
Which is the more important problem is the tracking, right?
Yeah.
Whether they work 1 job or 10 jobs is irrelevant.
Yeah, I think this is as much a managerial problem as it is an employee problem. On the employee side, I would say the issue would be more from like an IP perspective. If you're working for multiple companies, let's say even in the gaming industry, if you're working for multiple game
legal, of
companies,
course.
there's certainly like a IP issue, right? When employees sign an employee contract. And so let's say you work for company A and company B, company A launches a hit product and company B says, hey, that employee was working for us. I'm going to sue you for $50 million now.
I mean, okay, sure. I mean, yeah, put in your contract you can't work for other people, and have them working hard enough that it shouldn't be. It shouldn't. Yeah. I mean, okay, then maybe that's gonna happen. What was the other one
Uh,
that people slacking? Is that what the other thing is?
yeah, yeah. I think that's more of a managerial. And I have
Yeah.
one other problem
Yeah.
too. Maybe I could get to that. Is that in some companies, especially with new graduates or some of the younger employees, they actually want to social. They're the ones who actually want to go into the office because they don't know anybody. They and not and both from a socialization perspective and for wanting to get training. And I don't know, like we train remote, but maybe not all companies are adept at training remotely. I don't know. What's your take on that?
To borrow a word from your company, fuck them. I mean, I don't think that.
Uh,
I think that, and it has nothing to do with their age or anything like that. I'm not saying like, I'm just saying like, I fuck them means like the fact that people think that businesses is supposed to provide them with social is complete bullshit. And of course, if most people, if you say you can come to work and get paid and socialize all day long, they're gonna say that's great, right? Yeah, like I get to go get paid and talk about my cat and dog and the weekend all day long. Sure. But what they don't realize is your company is eventually going to fail. They're going to get laid off and they're going to lose their job. As a leader, I mean, we want to talk about boss, Jocko, as a manager, as you need to be the person that makes sure that they do the thing that in the end is going to be the best thing for them. And in the end, making them get their work done when they're at work and creating more value than they cost, substantially more value than they cost, is the best thing for them if they want to keep their job. If they don't want to keep their job, then you don't want to have them hired, obviously. But I think that stuff is such bullshit. I think that but I really love, talking to people. I mean, of course you do. So do I. I mean, the funny thing is people will go, well, yeah, but Brett, you don't like meetings. That's the complete opposite of the truth. When I get on meetings, I'm chatty Cathy. I'm blah, 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 blah. People don't want to meet with me. So I'm
yeah,
protecting myself from my
yeah.
own weaknesses. Humans have substantial weaknesses. And as businesses, which are not humans, we need to build systems to protect the business from the weaknesses of the humans. It's like having parts, any part of the business. You want to protect yourself from weaknesses and issues from it. So yeah, I shouldn't say fuck them, but I try to be extreme in that case because I feel like people are so accepting of that,
Okay.
particularly in America. I don't know, but it's just like it's something that should not be acceptable. It's just
Okay.
it's yeah.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, we might differ a little bit there in that we are a little bit more empathetic to socialization,
It's not saying much.
just because
Say your
we I think we talked about this before, right? Where the difference when we talked about work-life balance versus work-life integration, where we actually kind of believe that, in terms of that third nuance with respect to work-life integration being about socialization. And then what about training? What do you think is the role of training? And do you think it's a fair argument to make, or maybe not a fair argument to make, but do you see any inhibitors? Like, why would people not be able to train over Zoom? Is maybe that's not even a fair
Yeah, I don't see
comment or
any
fair
issue
excuse.
to it. And I actually think that training is much more important for companies that don't go remote because your pool of talent is much smaller than mine, right? So therefore, you need to work with the small amount of people that you can hire in your area. So it's necessary for you to build training so that you can get somebody to do the thing that you need to do. Whereas I have a pool of, let's say, 20 million people. If I'm good at finding people, there's less reliance on training someone because just mathematically, there's probably a good amount of people out there who definitely can do the thing that I need them to do for whatever reason. They have a random set of, life circumstances that makes them amazing at the things that I want them to be amazing at, and I just need to go find them. So that's one of the cost benefits, or one of the cost benefits that you receive is going remote.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up. Right? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that after talking to you about this, I think you make some great points in that if you are thinking about your company and basing the sort of future success of your company on the ideation, the creative process, the artistic amazingness that happens when you're working together with a small, really talented people, right? Like if you're in a music studio or if you're creating a great game, then I think that then remote work is the least valuable in that scenario. Also, if you only have about a 5-year time horizon, right? Like I personally want to work on my company for 25, 30 years, potentially even, 30 years. So I have a very long time horizon thought process. So of those two variables, then I think remote work is the least valuable for it. If
Okay.
you, however, are trying to create more of a system that you think is going to last longer and you want to get value from other areas like operational excellence, then I think you should seriously consider the benefits of remote work, because if you sum up all the benefits, I think they greatly outweigh the benefits of being in an office.
Right. And I think to some of the points that you made that I hadn't thought about is like assuming in success we achieve 0 to 1, we create that hit product, and now we're live. Then it's like, oh yeah, in live, do we have structural advantage by being in person, or should it actually be a remote situation? And in the case in which remote makes more sense, which theoretically I would, at high level, probably agree with you that, 1 to n, once we're live, remote probably does make more sense. Then in that scenario, we should think about what impact does that have on our company and how do we continue to invest and harden our remote work policies. But
Yeah. Or
yeah,
if you're thinking you want to do this, you want to create 5 new games, or want to do this for the next 20 years, I think that would be another reason why you'd want to really sort of start thinking about how you operationalize creating games.
all right. I think that's it. I think we went over on time, but until next time, everybody, Philosophy Friday. Catch y'all later. Bye.